first of all, it's been a little while since I started out going through our core values, and I don't want anyone to think that we do not take our core values very seriously. And so I thought I would mention those today briefly while we still have a few people that are joining us. We have 4 core values at CC Sales Pro that we believe in 100%. First one is always learning. We take employee and sales rep training and development seriously. And so our first core value is always learning. We believe that learning should be a process that's continuous and ongoing, and so always learning. Second is always living. We believe in spending our limited time on important things. We believe in spending our limited time on important things. And so, rather than most people, I find, really get caught up in this back and forth between trying to decide what is most important in their life. Is my family most important? Is my work most important? Is, my volunteer work most important? What's most important? Is my marriage most important, or is my, parenting most important? These kind of impossible choices that really just provide stress and anxiety and actually, ironically, paralyze people from making any kind of decisions or taking any action. We don't believe in that. We believe in always living. And always living basically means there are 2 kinds of things and 2 kinds of relationships in your life. There are important things and important relationships, and then there are unimportant things that are not worth you spending your time on. And what we believe is simply scheduling your life around deciding what is important. And when I say important, I mean important enough to take action on, and what is not important enough to take action on, and simply focusing as much of your time as possible on those things that are important enough to take action on. Just yesterday, actually, I got to the office. I was here for about an hour and got a call that my son had a little fall. I have a 3-year-old son named Donnie, and he had a fall. He's a pretty tough guy, but he got a pretty good gash in his forehead and had to get stitches and everything like that. And so between that and, kind of going to the plastic surgeon and how they were going to stitch it all up and everything, it really took kind of the entire day yesterday of doing that. And my wife she volunteers as a school teacher at a local Christian school, and that's important to her. And so, both of us, without any thought about it, of course, just canceled our day and went and took care of our son, because that's obviously important enough to take action on. And so, but on the flip side, I have also had many days recently where my work demanded my attention for the entire day, and I needed to work from, 8:30 in the morning until midnight. And so, you always have these important things in your life, and the key is to getting all of those important things into your life and getting rid of the unimportant things, rather than spending all of your time trying to decide, which is more important. Instead, just decide which is important and which is unimportant. And by the way, yes, my son is doing great. He did a little, he had to go under anesthesia yesterday for about a half hour while they got him all fixed and stitched. But now he's fine, and so he's in great spirits and doing well. So thank you for asking that. All right, here we go. Next, always leveraging. We believe in using technology and procedural systems to get more done in less time and with less resources. And so we believe in having a system for everything, and I'm going to talk more about that on the second slide once I get into the presentation, so I won't spend too much time there. Okay, next we have always inspiring. We use every interaction as an opportunity to inspire. We use every interaction as an opportunity to inspire. And this is something that's very important. I believe you want to have, this, interactions throughout your day, whether it's with your family, whether it's with friends, whether it's with potential customers, clients, vendors, partners, whatever it might be. It's going to be very important that you are inspiring them. Okay? All right, now let me get the next slide pulled up here, and then we're going to start getting into kind of the meat of this and talk about really the purpose for today's call. All right, here we go. So today what I want to talk to you about is building your merchant services portfolio. Building your merchant services portfolio, or put another way, how do we get your residual up? How do we increase your residuals? Well, first of all, let's do some basic math, okay? The way that we figure out how much your residual income is going to be on a monthly basis, okay, is actually a very simple math equation, and it starts with the number of merchants that you have in your portfolio. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now because the next slide deals exclusively with the 4 components of building your portfolio in terms of the number of merchants. But I do want to cover a couple other things that also do play a major role and that you need to be aware of if you're going to be serious about the merchant services business of going out and selling customers on credit card processing services. First of all, the gross margin is really important, the gross margin. And so the gross margin, basically what that means, what is the total profitability of the accounts that you're selling on average? Now, there's really 2 ways you can impact this. The first one, of course, would be targeting larger merchants. And so you're really going to spin your wheels in this business if you focus all of your time on tiny, mom and pop businesses that do $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month in volume. You should be getting a steady flow of those, but you should also be getting a steady flow of businesses that are doing $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month in credit card processing volume if you want to have a high gross margin. The second part of the gross margin is going to be the cost structure. And so you need to be aware of the cost structure. But let me just say this, I believe that the cost structure is actually one of the things in our industry that's gotten blown a little bit out of proportion. In other words, salespeople end up digging in and spending all this time looking at every little detail of the cost structure when, whether or not your cost is 2.9 cents or 3.9 cents per transaction, that's not going to matter that much in terms of it's a multiplier, and so you have to have a lot of merchant accounts before that really matters. So the key focus should be, I need to find the right partner so that I can get the number of merchant accounts drastically increased so that I have a much larger portfolio. And again, we'll talk about how to do that on the next slide. But you also do want to be aware of your gross margin, but primarily your gross margin is really more a function of the types of businesses that you're targeting more than the cost structure from the processor. The biggest difference in your gross margin, and I've seen, I've looked at probably 100 different Schedule A's over the last year from different processing companies, and I would say the big difference between, one processor and another, could be a difference of maybe $10 to $15 a month per merchant in gross margin, or about $5 to $7 a month in residual. But again, that doesn't make a very big difference if you look at the number of merchants and realize that one processor, your retention is twice as bad. You're losing all these customers from their lack of service or whatever it might be, or things that are keeping you from making sales. The most important thing to focus on is always going to be that number of merchants. Okay, the second thing we have is the residual split. So what percentage of the gross margin are you getting, right? What percentage are you getting? And so these 2 things really go together. You have your gross margin, which is the total profit for the account. Kind of an industry standard is about 50% for the independent sales rep, somewhere in that range. Now, if you're brand new, green to the industry, don't be surprised if somebody recruits you and pays you, 25, 30, 40% of the gross margin initially because you're learning the business. And so you're not providing as much value as somebody else that already has a lot of experience. So don't be put off by that. As long as you've got a good path to get to independent sales status where you're making around 50% of the gross margin, I would say you're in a pretty good spot. Now, the other thing to keep in mind with residual split here, you can, of course, grow your residuals a lot faster if you accept a straight residual split. Usually those are in the range of 70% or so, where you're getting 70% of the gross margin, but you're not getting any upfront money, and or you may not be getting a piece of equipment. Now, the equipment's actually really important as well. A lot of processors will offer, an 80 or 90% split on an inflated Schedule A cost structure. And one of the things that they do besides cutting out the upfront money is they don't give you a free terminal. Well, the problem with that is the free terminals you need to buy now are around $250. And so that's another $250 in cost. So you have to look at that and say, okay, is it really worth me losing maybe $8 a month on average in residuals in order to get that $225 terminal right up front, pre-programmed and ready to go. So when you take your total number of merchants times your gross margin times your residual split, you're going to get your monthly residual amount. Okay? And so that's how you get your monthly residual. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to get that number of merchants up. You need to be aware of your gross margin and your residual split, because that also matters a lot. But mainly your number of merchants is what we're going to focus on today. One last thing I just want to mention that a lot of newbies to the industry don't really understand. So here I've given you a simple format to understand your monthly residuals. But here's the other thing you need to understand. If you take those monthly residuals and multiply them by roughly 24, that's going to get you your portfolio value. And really over the last 24 to 36 months, I've kind of seen the what they call a buyout. I've seen these residual buyouts really kind of become more uniform. And so you can do a residual buyout for about a multiple of about 24. Now, depending on how large the portfolio is and what other leverage you might have, you're probably not going to get all 24x up front. You might get, 16, 17, 18x up front, and then you get the rest of it over time as that portfolio stays solid for whoever purchased it. But let me just describe this for the new agent. So let's give you two different examples, okay? Let's say example number one, you have $1,000 a month in residual income, okay? Most processors will buy that residual from you, so you don't get paid any residual anymore, and in exchange for that, they'll give you 24 months worth of residual up front. So if you have $1,000 in residual, they're going to give you $24,000 into your bank account up front. And then you don't get paid that residual on those particular merchant accounts anymore, and then you start building another portfolio. And so this happens a lot in our industry. There's a lot of buyouts going on. I've done buyouts of different portfolios to finance our company growth. And so this is something that does happen. Also, as your residual grows, people will loan you money against that residual, again, to grow your business, pay for marketing expenses, hiring people, whatever your plans are to grow your business. So the importance of getting your merchant services portfolio up is not just about, it's not just about that monthly income. It's also about how much it's worth. I'll give you two other examples. If you have a $5,000 portfolio a month, $5,000 a month, that portfolio is worth about $120,000, and that's a liquid asset. That means you could get $120,000 for that portfolio. If you had a $10,000 a month portfolio, you'd be looking at about $240,000. So you would literally your net worth would be increased by about $250,000 if you had a $10,000 a month portfolio. I've got quite a few sales partners that actually have a $15,000 a month portfolio or higher after being in the business for a few years. 15,000 times 24 is 360,000. So now you've got over $250,000 in net worth from that portfolio. And so make no mistake about it, this is a great industry, and these accounts are worth serious money. If you have an account and let's say you've got $50 a month in residual from an account, you can take that times 24, and not only do you get the $300 up front or whatever you're going to get an upfront bonus, but that account you could also sell the residual after several months of what they call seasoning. You could sell that account for $1,200. Okay, as part of a larger portfolio. And so these accounts are worth real money, and if you just stick with this business a little while and build up a portfolio, you can even sell a portion of your portfolio or borrow against it in order to even out your cash flow to stay in this business longer and really build the business that you want. So it's a unique opportunity because you get upfront money, you get residual income, and that residual income has a ready market that's willing to buy it at a very good multiple. So, how do we increase the number of merchants? How do you grow a portfolio? How do you build a profitable portfolio? Well, I want to talk about 4 different things that you can do to build a profitable portfolio. If you want to take notes, that's fine. Number of merchants. How do you increase the number of merchants? Number 1 is effective prospecting. Effective prospecting. So let me give you 3 items under this bullet point of effective prospecting. You need to answer this question for yourself. Are you prospecting effectively? Okay? Let's look at 3 questions. And again, if you have questions, type them out in the question box over to the right, and I will go through and answer all of those questions at the end of the slide. Number 1, are you walking into 20 businesses per day? Now, if you came to me and said, James, give me one tip, just one action step, one thing that I could do that would be most likely to guarantee my success in this industry, what would it be? And I would tell you without hesitation, it would be walk into 20 businesses per day at a minimum. Okay? I have never worked with one salesperson who walked into 20 businesses per day, 5 days a week for 3 months straight, who did not succeed in this business. Let me say that again. I have never worked with one salesperson who walked into 20 businesses per day, 5 days a week for 3 months straight that failed in this business. Okay? It is statistically, in my experience, walking into 20 businesses per day minimum is a statistical guarantee of success in this business. Okay? Now, obviously, you need to know how to sell. You need to know what your opening pitch. You need to understand some things, of course. But we provide all of that to you through our video courses and our training. And so, you're going to have that. And so I'm betting that if you don't know how to sell, you're probably not interested in this opportunity in the first place. Or if you don't know how to sell, you're probably going to give up after a couple days. And what I found is if you're willing to walk into 20 businesses per day minimum and present, make a presentation there and walk in and talk to somebody, you are going to be successful in this business. Now, how successful? Well, let's look at these other two. Do you have an opening pitch memorized? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Just like I've worked with over 500 sales reps personally, I've probably had over 1,000 phone calls that went something like this. I call the sales rep and they tell me, James, I'm not doing well in the field. Now, my first question is, how many businesses a day are you walking into? And I would say 75% of the people will say, oh, well, yesterday wasn't a good day for me, and today I was really tired, and, tomorrow I've got to go to this family thing, and, So 75% of the time, I basically have to say, well, I'm sorry to crash your parade here, but if you would like to make money, you have to work. So if you're not walking into 20 businesses a day, you're going to fail. I don't care how smart you are or how good your presentation is. If you're not walking into any businesses, you're not going to make any sales. So that's obviously number one. But many of you that are on this call today, you're like, yeah, I walked into 20 businesses yesterday and I didn't get any sales. I didn't get any statements. What's going on? And my next question is always the same. I say, go ahead and give me your opening pitch. And almost without fail, the response comes back from a salesperson who is ill-prepared to present the services. They don't have a good opening pitch memorized. Many times they can't even give me an opening pitch. You have to write out and memorize your opening pitch. Now, I have a video on YouTube called Learning Your Lines. You could look at that. I also have video courses online, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And you can go to the video course on how to sell merchant services. And I give you an opening pitch word for word, okay? Start with that. Memorize that opening pitch. Earlier this week, I wrote a blog article called A Boring Foundation for Creative Success. A boring foundation for creative success. And I talked about how, don't be afraid to make your foundation out of what somebody else has already proven to work. Get my opening pitch and just use that. I already know it works. I've been doing it for years. So get an opening pitch and memorize it and make sure you have that in place. Number 3, you have to follow up systematically. Follow up systematically. Now, I'm going to give you my system. And again, if you want to take some notes, go for it. I'm going to give you my system for follow-up because it is so incredibly simple. Okay? Here's what I do. First of all, you want to make sure you have a CRM database. Now, so I have a CRM database, okay? I walk into a business. When I leave that business, I pause for about 1 minute and update my CRM database with the following. If I don't already have their information in my database, like the owner's name, the business name, the address, the phone number, etc., obviously I go ahead and put that in using my mobile phone. Then the next thing I do is I take notes. And when I say that I take notes, I mean that I take copious notes. I mean, I write down everything that I learned when I was in that business. I mean, if I talk to somebody at the counter, I put that person's name. If I got the name of their daughter who has a piano recital tomorrow, I write that down. Put that down. At what type of terminal, I put that in there. Everything imaginable, I put in there. Any information they gave me about anything, I include in the notes section. Okay? Next, and most importantly, I also decide what my next action step is going to be. At that moment, when I just left the business, I decide what is going to be my next action step. Okay? If I decide there is no next action step, in other words, this particular prospect is not really worth my time to follow up on because they're really not interested, and I don't think they're going to be interested anytime in the future. Okay? Then I go ahead and mark that one as not interested in the CRM so it doesn't come up in my view of active prospects, and I'm done. Okay? If there is a next action step at any point in the future, I put that in there. Now, too many salespeople, what they do is they say, well, I say, what's the next action step with this merchant? Oh, I don't really know. I mean, they might be interested in a few months. And I say, okay, so how are you going to record that? Well, I'll just follow up in a few months. How are you going to know to follow up in a few months? I'll just remember, right? Of course you're not going to remember. You're going to talk to 100 businesses a week. You're really going to remember? No. Go ahead and put the next action step in. If the next action step is come back tomorrow to get a statement, put that in there. If the next action step is follow up in 6 months or a year, put that in there. Follow up systematically. Have a system and always record your next action step when you leave the business because that is when you're in the best position to think about what the next logical action step would be. Also, make sure when you do this that you include some information about how you should pitch the merchant when you come back. You need to get very systematical about your sales approach. Think about, okay, was this person kind of a quiet person? Were they loud? Were they, did they talk fast? Did they talk slow? How should I approach this person when I come back? What was their biggest objection? If it was trust, maybe you should put in your notes, come back tomorrow to get a statement and bring 3 letters of reference, right? Or maybe they're a little bit concerned about their terminal being old, so you should say, come back on Thursday when Bob will be here with Mary and show both of them the new VX520 and what it looks like. So think creatively about how you can make that next step in the sales process and then make that a reality, but record it in your system. So follow up systematically by having all the data in a database, having the notes from each visit, all the information you can, and by choosing the next action step, entering that into the database and creating a reminder for yourself in your database every single time you walk out of a business. So now you're effectively prospecting. What's the next thing you have to do? Well, of course, we all know the ABCs of selling. Always be closing. Always be closing. Okay? You've got to learn to close the sale. Now, I'm going to give you 3 closing pitches that I use successfully, and you can take some notes on these if you'd like, or you can go to where I got all 3. Well, actually, I got 2 of these from Tom Hopkins and his book, Mastering the Art of Selling. And I got the first one, the permission close, from somebody else. I can't remember, all of a sudden it's slipping my mind. Brian Tracy in Mastering the Art of Closing, I believe it's called. And so those 2 books by Brian Tracy and Tom Hopkins gave me these 3, and these are the 3 I found that are most effective when selling merchant services. But the most important thing is never leave a merchant location without trying to close the sale. You have to try to close the sale. So here we go. The first one is the permission close. Now, the permission close works best when you've had a fairly good conversation with the merchant. They have somewhat of a trust level with you, and you've already gone through a lot of the program details. Maybe you've gone through the cost analysis, and you now use the permission close, which says, Bob, with your permission, I'd like to go ahead and get this paperwork started so that I can get your free terminal out to you in a couple days. The key to the permission close is 2 things. Number 1 is asking permission at the beginning, with your permission, Bob. And secondly, it is using basically a silent close at the end. So you're not asking a yes or no question. You don't want to say, with your permission, Bob, I'd like to go ahead and get this paperwork started so I can get that free terminal out to you in the next couple days. Does that sound good to you? You can't say, does that sound good to you? You've got to cut it off at the end of the question and stop talking, and you cannot talk again until they talk. So I'll say it one more time. Bob, with your permission, I'd like to go ahead and get the paperwork started for you today so that I can get this credit card terminal out for you in the next couple of days. And then stop talking and just be silent until they talk. Give them a second to think. Very effective close. If you feel like, I think I got this person on the hook, I think that they're interested somewhat, use the permission close. It'll work most of the time. Second is the alternate advance. Now, the alternate advance question, there are a million possibilities with this, and you can target a lot of different areas of your presentation. The idea of the alternate advance is to present them with a yes, yes option. For instance, Bob, I know I've given a lot of details today, but I have another question for you. If you decided to move forward with our program, would you prefer keeping your existing terminal, or would you like me to give you a free upgraded terminal that's ready to accept Apple Pay and EMV compliance? So now you've given him a yes or yes alternative. If he says, you know what, I'm really comfortable with my terminal that I have, I think I want to keep that for a while, you would say, great, let me go ahead and get started on the paperwork, and you can actually go right back into a permission close. So then you can say, great, Bob, with your permission, I'll go ahead and get started on the paperwork so we can get that terminal reprogrammed for you in the next couple days. All right? So an alternate advance question is a great way to get a yes or yes. Now, if somebody is on the fence and you don't know if they're interested yet, you don't know if they're ready to buy, use an alternate advance question, but preface it with what I call a buffer, which is the if question, right? If you were to move forward with us, would you prefer X or X? Right? And again, there's a lot of different options for this. You could talk about a lot of different, things, parts of the program that you can give a yes or no. Alternate advance would be, Bob, if you decided to move forward with the program, would you prefer to have a PIN pad so you could accept these PIN debit transactions, or do you prefer to just continue accepting only credit and check cards? There's another good alternate advance question. And once they respond to that, you'll be able to tell a lot from the response. If they say, well, I'm not saying I'm going to move forward yet, but I would want the PIN debit. Well, now you know where you're at. So you can't go right into a permission close. Now you need to go back and say, Bob, what other questions would you have for me about our program? And kind of go back into it and get a little bit closer before you do the alternate advance and the permission close again. Okay, the third one is the paperwork close. Now, the paperwork close works best for those individuals who seem very interested, but they're maybe not as decisive. You can tell that they're thinking about it, but they're nervous to make a decision. If you feel that you've presented a strong value proposition, they want to move forward, they're interested, but you can tell that they're just, if you ask them a question, they might say no, or they would probably say, let me think about it. The paperwork close is a great way to move forward. The way that the paperwork close works is simply this. You will simply take out the paperwork and say, Bob, with your permission, I'd like to go ahead and get some basic information so that I can get this paperwork started. How do you spell your last name? Get the spelling of their last name. Bob, what is the best phone number to reach you at? Get the phone number. Bob, what is the actual physical address here of the business? And here's what's going to happen. One of two things is going to happen. If they give you 3 or 4 pieces of information, don't start with their social security number and their bank account, right? Start with their last name, their phone number, their billing address. If they give you all 3 pieces of information, you can continue moving forward as if they have agreed to the purchase, because they have. Okay, that's the beauty of the paperwork close. If they give you the information, then they're going to move forward. Or they're going to stop you and say, well, I'm not really comfortable, saying that I'm going to move forward yet. You then want to go back into the paperwork close one more time by saying something like, that's okay, Bob. All I'm doing is taking notes because I don't know how you are, but my memory is terrible. I don't want to forget any of the details. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to take some notes. And then try to continue getting information and see if they're willing to move forward at that point. If they still give you pushback and say, well, I just want to make sure you know I'm not interested in buying today, then of course you need to pull away from the paperwork close and go back to talking to them and saying, Bob, what would you say are your top 3 concerns right now? Or, Bob, what other questions would you have for me? So, you want to jump back into it that way. So there you have 3 very effective closing techniques, and the most important closing technique is simply to close. Make sure you close on every visit. Try to close. Always be closing. Next, paperwork and installation. Now, I just want to give a little tip here about this because this is an area where I am always amazed at the percentage of merchant accounts that are lost during the paperwork and installation process. Okay? Let me give you a little tip here. Okay? If you get a merchant to tell you yes and they complete the paperwork, get that sale approved. Somebody will approve it. Secondly, though, make sure you get them activated, okay? Until that terminal is installed and they are using it to process their transactions, the sale is not complete because if they cancel or they never activate, your bonus is going to be bought back and you're not going to get any residual. So keep selling, keep that sense of urgency all the way through the activation process. Finally, number 4, retain your portfolio. And I want to just give you 3 tips here because, it doesn't really do you that much good if you make 100 sales and 50 of them cancel within the first 12 months, right? Because now you're kind of right back at, you're back to 6 months ago. You've lost 6 months worth of sales that you're going to have to make all over again. You've got to retain your portfolio. And this is a delicate balance because I recognize that you want to spend most of your time out making sales. And I get that. But it is significantly less expensive to retain a customer than it is to get a new one. So how do you retain your portfolio? 3 things. Number 1, a system of relationship building. Let me give you my system. My system of relationship building went in threes. So here you go. You ready? Here's what I did. For the first 3 weeks, I called or stopped by the merchant location every week. Okay? For the first 3 weeks, I stopped by. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. The first 3 days, I called or stopped by the merchant's location every day for 3 days. Now, maybe the next day you call them to say, hey, are there any concerns that you have? I just want to double check and make sure everything's going smoothly for you. And then the 3rd day, you stop by again and say, I just want to stop by one more time and thank you for your business. See if you had any further questions or anything that you need from me. Then the first 3 weeks then, so a week later I stop by, then a week later I stop by, then a week later I stop by or call. So the first 3 days I stop by or call every day. The next 3 weeks I stop by or call every week. Then the next 3 months, so starting with month number 2, now I'm going to stop by or call once every month. And after that, I'm going to stop by once every quarter. That was my system of relationship building. Now, I will tell you on the quarterly one, I actually did stop by in person. And I made sure that I not just stopped by, but I made sure that I actually connected with the owner at some point once every quarter, every 3 months. Okay? So, a system of relationship building, very important to retaining your portfolio. Number 2, nurturing your merchant accounts. Now, add some sticky services, okay? Let me give you some examples of sticky services. The 2 that I can name right off the top of my head that are the stickiest. Number 1 on my list is going to be web design.